There's a secret world just outside the hospital walls where clinicians trade stethoscopes for startups. If you've ever wondered how someone goes from seeing patients to building the future of healthcare, you're in the right place. I'm Kayla, a PA on a mission to figure out what comes next. When I started researching careers in health tech, I found confusing job titles and zero clarity on how clinicians actually made the transition. So I went straight to the source, the people who already did it. Each week, we demystify a specific career path by someone who's already living it, whether it's from the bedside to the boardroom, the startup, or something completely different. Whether you're planning your exit, passively curious, or already working in health tech, this is your insider's guide. Welcome to Corporate Espionage. And today I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Dr. Natalie Davis, who is a fifth-generation Western Kentuckian and pediatrician who left home to train and practice medicine in St. Louis. When she returned to her hometown years later, she barely recognized it. High school friends were dying in their 40s from preventable diseases, and people couldn't change even if they wanted to. So, of course, in response to this, she co-founded and is the CMO of PreventScripts, which helps PCPs in the area and the region tackle the chronic and metabolic disease epidemic proactively and across the lifespan. She's no stranger to the world of health tech. She's advised companies like Doximity and HealthTap. She's an LP at Scrub Capital. And back in the early 2000s was even coined the first iPhone doctor with her very innovative mobile clinic. Today, we're going to talk about the moment that she decided to build this company to revolutionize this care, some challenges of serving rural populations, and why she continues to build for proactive care in a very reactive system. So welcome, Natalie. Thrilled to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's dive in. So you were practicing as a pediatrician in very wealthy areas of St. Louis before coming home to Kentucky. If you could, I would love for you to kind of paint us a picture. Where were you? And then what happened when you got back? What was that contrast like?
Right. That was a really big change time in my life. I had been practicing in this affluent, zip code right next to Washington University in St. Louis. And that was my practice population. And after 7 years of that work, I went to do a cash house call practice and went around making house calls in those neighborhoods around St. Louis. And it was obviously a very niche practice for high income families. Had a lot of triplets, had a lot of Catholic families having a bunch of children. And after moving, I was really starting to become obsessed with innovation after I spoke at the Mayo Clinic in 2009 and Transform Symposium. That was sort of my first foray into realizing, wow, I do have some good ideas, and started sort of developing myself as a customer experience expert in healthcare. And met a few people, and I knew Jeff Tangney from the old Hippocrates days as a user and the first app in the App Store. And that weekend of that symposium, I met Indu Sabia from Health 2.0, and I met Ron Gutman from HealthTap. And Ron had just sold his first company, and I remember he was kind of bopping around. And I just remember the conversations I had with him and thought, wow, whatever he's going to look into next is probably going to be something I should pay attention to. And so I ended up doing advisory work just right after moving back to Kentucky for both HealthTap and Doximity around the same time. And I just started to really, see how quickly the mobile could change. And we would have a release when I was working at HealthTap, we'd have a release every Friday. And, Saturday I would start doing telemedicine work and, things would be a little messed up. And then by Monday, it would all the bugs would be fixed again. So really started to see how quickly, and to contrast that, an electronic health record that I was using, before that was Office Practicum. That was a CD that I actually installed on an IBM ThinkPad,
Nice.
and synced a Trio with the laptop. And, so that thought of this mobile development was just very exciting. And simultaneously, I was working on an Epic implementation at the local hospital in Kentucky and was going to those meetings. And I was really realizing, this situation is, I maybe go to a meeting once a year and give some feedback, if I'm lucky, if I'm the builder or the super user of that system, versus this mobile development was just happening so fast and at this breakneck pace. So I was comparing those two environments, and then sort of simultaneously, the customer experience on the mobile was so amazing. So this is, you can request a doctor right in your phone anytime, and the, patient generated visit immediately versus, the clunky old school doctor way of I keep my schedule and you have to work around my schedule, and, all of that sort of way that healthcare, that old way that healthcare evolved. It was just such a cognitive dissonance to me. And around that time, coming back to Kentucky, I realized, my friends I grew up with, everyone's gained 60 pounds. I don't recognize people. Like, what in the world happened here? You know, the neighborhood that I grew up in, when I grew up, there was sort of this solo McDonald's, on this sort of stretch. And as I come home, there's every fast food that you can think of, down this
Yeah.
stretch of the road that, you just can't, you have to sort of go like this to sort of avoid looking at it, so that the food desert, combination with the processed food and the culture here is just really problematic for healthy eating. And I just couldn't stand it. Yeah, when I felt like this is really like a moral imperative to do something to help these poor people. Our life expectancy in my state, my home state, is 73.5. So it's terrible. We toggle with Mississippi and sometimes West Virginia for the worst life expectancy state, but it's all lifestyle disease.
Yeah. So you sound like someone who runs towards problems. You mentioned that, you mentioned that you'd have problems on a Friday and they'd be fixed on a Monday after a little weekend hiccups. You mentioned that you were helping to implement Epic actively in the early days. You mentioned that you were pushing to use this EMR when it's a CDD, when it's a CD that you're injecting into your computer. And then you also are spearheading a mobile clinic before DPC is cool, before, of course, house calls is the old way, but doing it in this way is quite intimidating. And then, of course, you come home and you see this problem and you're like, sucks, let's go for it. Let's fix it. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
That's funny you say running. You're seeing a pattern of my running towards problems, and that takes me back when I was in high school. I grew up as a musician and did all the STEM curriculum, growing up. My father was an engineer, so I've sort of had math, physics, and science pounded into me. But I was very obsessed with biology as a young child, and in my high school classes, had some great anatomy teachers in high school. And when
Yeah.
I was thinking of college majors, the reason I picked medicine is because it was the hardest thing I could think of. Simultaneously, I wanted to help people. I mean, obviously everyone that goes into medicine wants to help people.
Yeah.
But to me, coming from a family of engineer, being a doctor seemed maybe even harder than that. In my sort of high school, I don't know, I was 17 years old at the time, my high school mind. So I sort of I suppose, had this history of running towards
Yeah.
problems, really from the very beginning. And I see that now about myself, that I like
Yeah.
to do things that are hard.
I love that. I think that that's an amazing quality. I think some of, the favorite people that I've ever met have that quality simply because, or I love them because, you're not sitting in this life sucks. Everything's crumbling around me. You're like, no, what do we do about it? I know that I'm not stuck here forever. So that's great. That's so funny. I recognized that immediately when you started to talk about all these instances of, like I said, running towards things. So as you're coming back home, you're seeing these problems. Talk me through the nuts and bolts of the experience of observation and the action that followed?
That's a good one. That's a good one. The observation that I had here in Kentucky, for one thing, I was the only Medicaid provider in this very large county in Kentucky. And, the family medicine doctors would maybe take Medicare, but not Medicare and Medicaid. And so I'm seeing these
Wow.
kids. Right. Yeah. I'm seeing these kids. I know it's amazing. This is rural. This
Like,
is rural health.
yeah, if you're not watching the video, my eyes are like bugging out of my head.
Like you gotta, yeah. Yeah. So I started seeing, I was seeing the kids and then seeing, wow, nobody is seeing these adults. There's no primary care provider. So I start seeing adults for just basic things, sinus infections. Really started seeing these patterns of cardiometabolic disease within families. And you have the child who is,
Yeah.
elevated BMI and sedentary, has never had a fruit or a vegetable besides french fries, has never had any water at all, drinking only soda. It's sort of us, almost like the most extreme version that you could imagine. And as healthcare providers, it's really hard for us to imagine that. But that was really the reality here and still is the reality here. In fact, in one of our workflows in PreventScripts, patients might pick drinking more water as one of their micro goals, and their barrier to drinking water is, I just don't like water.
Mhm.
And so sort of recognizing that moment, so we had literally the worst possible lifestyle, many, many times of fast food a week and all of the things. And so, right, this is a child, this is a 12, 13-year-old child, but there's parents in charge of the child, right?
Of
And the
course.
parents, the cause of the pediatric lifestyle behaviors are the parents' lifestyle behaviors. As pediatricians, we've always known this is a family thing, to try to improving a child's weight. And so it's a whole family approach. The thing that I noticed that really intrigued me is there was a family that came in and the mother had just discovered one of the mobile apps. I'm trying to remember which one it was. This was a long time ago. So it was when the consumer apps were first kind of coming together. And I thought, wow, you could almost sort of see this light bulb over her head, this light bulb moment. And I remember thinking, this is engagement. This is
Yeah.
working for this mom. But then the quick second thought was, I didn't provide that value as a doctor. And I really wanted to see the back end, of that data. How is she using it? What are her step counts? What are her fruit and vegetable intake, and all of those things. And so what I really started thinking about then, and in our first screenshots that I sort of scribbled out on a piece of paper, were basically what are the three behaviors that we want people to do, 3, 4 behaviors. And we want them to drink more water. We want them to eat more fruits and vegetables. We want them to move more. And then what are the numbers that are really important? Your weight, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, maybe a close fourth is your waist circumference. And the thought was that maybe we could just put all of those things on one screen, and then color code them so that patients can see they're in the red, they're in the yellow, here's where your number is in an objective way. Patients don't want to be red. They don't want to be red. They don't want to be
Right.
yellow, like any of us. And we built that off of a lot of old, health department research on color coding for blood pressures. And so that engagement moment, combined with, wow, I'd like to be able to track as a doctor. And then, patients didn't want to disappoint me. They would love to have me as their accountability partner. And you see that on some level, in practice, and when you're seeing patients a couple of months apart or every 6 months, or even if it's once a year. But once a year isn't enough. That is a huge span of time for everyone to go home and forget everything you said
Absolutely.
and go back to their behavior. So this sort of notion of working with patients proactively in that blind spot is what turned into the cornerstone of the company from that.
So you're closing a lot of gaps. There's knowledge gaps that, as the physician, you miss because the patient might forget, the patient might just lie, the patient might not want to tell you the whole truth because maybe they have an element of shame, or they just don't know that what they're doing is wrong, right? Plain and simple education gap. So they're actually able to, rather than trying to recall something by memory, to actually write it down, record it. Then they're able to learn from those things. So you're able to get the information, they're able to get the information, and then they can say like, oh, wait, maybe this isn't good, or oh, I never thought about it this way, or I didn't know it was this bad. I feel
Mhm.
fine. Why would I care about my blood pressure? I feel fine. I hear that all the time. That's really cool. Okay. So, I mean, this isn't 2026. We can't call on Claude Code and say, "Hey, build me this app." So, talk me through back then, like what was the process like? Are you are you
How do we do it?
also a software engineer in your free time?
I am not, and
I thought you were going to say that you were.
I am not.
Honestly.
I am not. When we first had our concepts, I was scribbling this stuff on a pieces of paper,
Yeah.
literally.
Yep.
And we started with some UI UX work. And so I sort of became a UI UX designer back when we didn't have Figma, back before we had Canva and Figma. I can't even remember the first software we started using, but we started doing these wireframes. And then we went to get a grant in Kentucky. It was a rural innovation grant. And the investor that was in charge of that grant told us, well, he did tell us this is probably a crazy idea, but then he simultaneously told us, you two go out and get a CTO and I will back this. So we went out and found the best, you know, local guy that we could find. And as it turns out, Jay, our CTO, had got to college and the internet was slow. And so he sort of started his own internet service provider, grew it with his friend. And it was the two of them. They grew
Very
it with no
cool.
funding and they had a significant exit and just split the money back in the day. And he
Yeah.
then became an iPhone developer before that was cool, and taught Nike how to teach iPhone development to their team. And so I just
So
went
you
over to his
found the
office.
guy.
Yeah, we found the guy. I went over to his office. I knew where his office was, and I got on the elevator. I'm thinking, okay, this guy's he bought a couple office buildings, after his exit. He bought a whole block, a couple blocks actually. And I just went over to his office and said, "Hey, Jay, we're doing this. We're looking for a technical co-founder. Come do this business with us." And so he developed our iPhone version, our original iPhone version, and then we used the grant to develop the Android version, part of the grant to develop this Android version. So, and we had several kids that went through this pilot. Actually, my very first patient that used our system was an almost 400-pound, severely obese 17-year-old in Owensboro who used our Android app and gave us lots of feedback. And really, we were able to get our first case study around the time of a little bit before COVID, when the remote monitoring codes came into play. We started realizing we have a real business here. And then we realized through one of our pilot studies that what we learned from the family medicine docs is, these people are just coming in all day long. I can't tell which patients are ready to have a conversation about their weight
Mm.
and which patients aren't ready to have a conversation about their weight. I would be happy to talk to them about it if I had the time. But not only do I not have the time, I don't know who is really ready to make a change. And so that was how we sort of took that information and started building out self-efficacy surveys, Prochaska di Clemente stage of change surveys, and built this into this very robust behavioral profile that was a very quick pre-visit piece. And this gave providers this robust information. Is this patient pre-contemplative? They don't even think they need to do anything
Yeah.
versus they're contemplative versus they are action. They're ready to go, ready to do something today. And that really gave us the giant behavior change funnel, this sort of funnel at the top, if you could imagine this whole patient population coming through and onboarding patients into interventions. And then the idea is that hopefully these pre-contemplative people, given this maybe a little slower drip campaign of education, that they will be ready in 6 months or in a year to undergo a more intensive intervention.
Wonder for those patients as well if having a virtual slow drip of information is less abrasive and less shell shock for them, because a lot of those issues it's folks who don't want to face the problems or
Yeah,
who are in denial like you said.
yeah.
And sometimes having a conversation with a human person can be really intimidating and really abrasive. That makes
And we
complete and
sometimes
total
don't
sense.
handle those conversations well as
Absolutely.
doctors. We tend to be,
Yeah.
you do this, I'm the doctor. We have a dearth of shared decision making, and the way physicians and we providers sometimes handle these situations is often not great.
Yeah.
And that opportunity for that patient to learn in just a short email, it's sort of a, hey, did you know that patients that take varenicline are 2 times more likely to quit tobacco? Hey, that's just simple, just a little bit of information. Nothing, you don't have to quit today, but, these kinds of sort of light touch drip campaigns help the patient with engagement in interest in change of the behavior.
Yeah. And were you also using this in your practice as you're rolling out new features?
I ended up selling my practice in that rural area
Yeah.
when HealthTap came to me and said, hey, do you want to be a full-time telemedicine doctor? And so
Yeah.
I sold my practice and started working for HealthTap full time on the weekends while we were doing our work during the week. But that patient that I was telling you about was actually from when I was doing some contract work in Owensboro, Kentucky. During that time, just sort of coming to a clinic and helping them out a couple of days a week. And that's where I was able to really have our first test runs with patients on it. And then I've been full time doing this since we raised money and we've gotten into market and ramping up and doing
That's
scrub
really
capital
exciting.
part of my
Yeah.
time. And
Yep.
it's
Yep.
a different kind of patient care. It's sort of I can see the whole population. I can see, the surveys. I can see the patient engagement and our enrolled patients. Every once in a while as a startup founder, you might have to call up 100 people on the phone to ask them, how is that mobile app? Is it terrible? Is it okay? So, yeah, at the end of the day, even though you try to be high tech, sometimes you do things old school.
Absolutely. Do you feel like your identity as a physician has changed at all, or do you still feel like you wear that title?
My generation of physicians is a little different, I think, than the generation that came ahead of me. I have physicians, that were sort of my high school friends' parents, doctor, that were physicians. They tell me, they're in their 60s, sometimes 70s, oftentimes still practicing. They tell me if I'm not a physician, if I'm not practicing seeing patients in this way every day, I don't even know who I am. And I think my generation is very different. I'm 56. I think, my generation is getting out because we are burned out. And I would just recently went to my med school reunion. Both of my best friends from medical school, they're within 2 years of retirement and they're not even 60 years old. So the burnout and the moral injury in our healthcare system is so severe that, um, we have other opportunities. And to me, my other opportunity was doing this work in digital health. I just really felt drawn to it. I felt drawn to it. And then once I started as a builder
Yeah.
and recognized the opportunity, in practice, I can maybe help 2,000 people. Wow, we can scale up to, that 2,000 is going to be 20,000 is going to be 200,000 and it's going to be 2 million. And that's just the beauty of of a tech-enabled service model.
Absolutely. I think that that's such an important point to really drive home. The folks who live and breathe and eat and sleep patient care and taking care of patients, and you can't see yourself as a human without, direct care delivery. Like, God bless you. Please keep doing what you're doing. We need people like that in all walks of life, right? Especially in healthcare. And for the folks who feel that pull to explore more and to innovate and like be a part of the movers and shakers club, I also think that that's so important to really follow that North Star, which of course you have on the same thread. If someone is practicing clinically and might be identifying a problem that they see in their practice, what would you say is step one in validating if that idea is even worth pursuing?
Wow. I would say, I mean, you have to do customer discovery. Enda Geist has a wonderful, she's a very prolific angel investor in California. She has a wonderful website and blog where she talks about the buyers in healthcare. And, there's so many buyers. You can sell to consumers, you can sell to payers, you can sell to providers, you can sell into farm and industry. And there's probably one more that I haven't even thought of. And you have to get out and talk to these people because what you think is a problem is maybe it's a problem, maybe it's not a problem. And I will never forget the first cardiologist that I talked to when we thought we were going to be purely sort of primary prevention before we really realized from our customers they have all these diabetic patients, they have all these hypertension patients. We really have to have an intervention for diabetes, and we have to have an intervention for hypertension. And furthermore, we have to have tobacco cessation. And furthermore, we have to have an intervention for patients with CKD. We have to have an intervention for patients with CHF. And each of those looks a little different, but we realized the downstream were really the big problems. And when I went to a cardiologist in our local community and was talking with him and did this sort of customer discovery, what I realized that this was a long time ago. His problem, primary disease prevention wasn't a problem for him because he would have no cardiology practice.
Right.
He would have no business. There would be no heart attacks. There would be no CAS. There would be no echoes. There would be no ICU. There would be there'd be none of that. That was, I just remember that. It probably was my first customer discovery interview that I did. And so we said, hey, let's go to family medicine and see if, it's resonates there. And then
Yeah,
it did because, that's where the biggest opportunity for upstream disease intervention and disease prevention is really there and avoiding specialty referral altogether.
sure. Completely makes sense. That's intimidating
So
to
you can
have
want it
someone
to be
be
a
like,
problem.
well,
You can
right.
think it's a problem, but until you go and ask a stakeholder what their problems are, you don't know. You may think value-based care is a problem, but until you go and talk to the chief medical officer and the chief medical information officer and the chief financial officer and the CEO of a large academic medical center and see
Yes,
what they tell you about value-based care, how much of their work is in a value kind of contract. Maybe it's a lot, maybe it's 3%, maybe it's 5%. You
yeah,
don't know until you ask.
that's very true. So having those conversations just openly, open-mindedly, that's a great step one. I think, I mean, as clinicians, we tend to be quite good at having those conversations because that's pretty much what we do day in and day out. So it shouldn't be too intimidating, too hard. On the non, patient facing, investor facing, what sort of things from pediatrics and being a pediatrician, being a provider transferred over really well to the world of being a founder and an entrepreneur?
I was thinking about this. My 22-year-old just graduated college and he's just gotten his first job. He's sort of within the month, thinking he's never going to have a job. Well, he's got his first job. He's going, but I mean, work ethic is, I think, part of it. My co-founder sort of makes fun of me. She's like, "Oh, I know you'll be working. You'll be up. You'll be working early." It's just like you wake up and you just get going. I mean, I've been doing it. I've been doing it my whole life.
Right.
You wake up, you get ready, you get going. You hit it. You're either, when I was a resident, of course, you're doing that. When you're first in practice, I used to see 5 babies in 5 different hospitals before getting back to my clinic and starting, at 8 o'clock. You know, I did that for a
Yeah.
long, long time. And so I think work ethic of, you get used to seeing 40 patients a day. I used to see 40 patients a day all day, So
Me
if you
too.
can, right, so if you can do that, you can do anything. You can do anything. So it's
Yeah.
just waking up. The structure of working in a digital health business is very, very different. The way we communicate is different. We use system called Traction by Wickman, I think is his name, which I would recommend. It's on my
Mhm.
list. If you go to my website, Natalie Davis MD, and you look at my resources, here's all the books I read that help me along the way. And that book Traction we use at PreventScripts, and it's very good on um, you know, where do you want to be in 5 years, back that into 3 years, back that into 1 year, and then back those goals into quarters. And so each quarter has its work to be done. Each person on the team has they're called rocks to execute in that quarter. And so you get into this, and then you get into this weekly rhythm, sort of a Monday to Friday rhythm, and your team meetings. And we have as little meetings as
Mhm.
possible. It's very different from being on the board of a hospital, or going into,
Yeah.
working in a large academic medical center or for a large multi-billion-dollar health system, of which I have worked for several. Very different kind of meetings, very different kind of dynamic, and it's a results-oriented work environment. So it's everyone is depending on everyone. So you get your work done, and whether that's a sales and marketing goal, or those are KPIs for health outcomes, or those are, you're having trouble with this particular operational piece of the business. And it's just also loving what I do is I've always loved medicine. I loved seeing patients. I loved it when I did house calls. I loved, having my own practice. I loved doing work for Doximity and HealthTap, but I really love building my own digital health company. And it's just such it's the mission to help, 1 million patients lose, 10+% of their body weight and drop their
Yeah.
A1C 1.4 points and have that blood pressure reduction that we see. That is a big mission. And now that we're actually doing it, all it is just scaling it up and helping more patients and more providers along the way.
If you do what you love, you never work a day in your life, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm curious about your co-founder.
Brandy is
Yeah,
the CEO of I hope you get to meet her someday. Brandy
absolutely.
is also from Western Kentucky, and she jokes about this when we're on calls. She says she worked for the Peace Corps after grad school. She went to Vanderbilt for undergrad. I think she was an economics major. Then she got a master's in public health at Boston University, and did work for the Peace Corps for a little while. She said she sort of thought she might just, raise chickens in Africa and barter for chickens in Africa for a living, but she sort of accidentally moved home. And she is a taskmaster. She has won many awards. Won an award for converting a single free clinic here in Kentucky into expanded access into a 12 clinic setup, and did that, ran that clinic and converted it to an FQHC, and is a wonderful mission minded. She might be president one day, actually. Keep an eye out for that. We're a good yin and yang in the
Yeah.
business.
When you were looking for a business partner, were there any skills that you were looking for? And do you think that there are any blanket statements that you can say about if a clinician is looking for a business partner, what they should be looking for?
I think that's really, really important to pick a co-founder very, very carefully. And I actually knew Brandy before we co-founded PreventScripts together. I had met her a couple times. I just thought, this woman is really smart. Like, who is this
Mm-hmm.
girl? And when I started thinking about the business, I knew that it needed a team to really be successful. So I went to her and I said, hey, let's just have coffee. And she was actually thinking about going to medical school. And I said, that's a terrible idea. I said, that's a terrible
Best
idea
idea
because
you ever had, Brandy.
I showed her all my little scrawled, screenshots. We need to build this mobile app, and then we need to get it in the hands of patients. And then and I think I talked her out of going to medical school, and we started this business together instead. And it was sort of this idea of scaling up and helping more patients through technology. But I think you have to be very careful and not in a big rush to pick someone. We picked Jay as a technical co-founder, and he had a very successful prior exit. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's important. Businesses look for, I don't want to say you have to pay that much attention to what investors are looking for, but having a successful exit founder on your team, I think is key. I think if anyone is out there looking, send me an email. There's a group of these people out there that, I sort of keep, track of. And sometimes these folks, these guys or gals, they maybe were a founding CTO and the company sold, and they're sort of looking for the next big thing. So if you're a clinician and you've got the idea, coming together with a successful exit CTO is a great combination. In our case, we did the clinical founder, the business, Brandy, the business
Mm-hmm.
CEO, founder, operational, in terms of, we sit on these board meetings and we're looking at every financial line item and my eyes are glossing over, but she knows
Yeah.
every line and our board members are saying, what happened on this month? What's going on there? And so you have to have people that round out your skill set, but you need that complete skill set on your team. And it takes a while to find that.
Absolutely. I'm the phrase that's coming to top of mind right now, thinking about you, Brandy, and Jay, is the Holy Trinity.
Yep. Hacker, hustler, and hipster, I think is what people are calling this sort of co-founding. That's what we call it at Startup Health. And Startup Health has this DNA of having a technical co-founder, a business co-founder, and then a clinician in the founding team. There's lots of companies that are using this sort of dynamic, and I wouldn't do it any other way. And I think having a clinician, of course, to have the evidence base there is very, very important. I mean, how often do we see, just today, I saw another company that spent $500 million and they all went out of business and maybe a couple of them had to go to jail for fraud. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think getting, out there and understanding the healthcare system and understanding all those buyers is really, really important. You can't just wing it.
Yeah. There's so much nuance in the healthcare world. And I think that there is tremendous value as well to someone who has walked the walk too, right? An actual person who has been boots on the ground. We have seen some things. I think the a lay person doesn't necessarily understand why we refer to working in healthcare in some of the ways that we do, because like you just have not spent a year working in a hospital day in and day out. So yeah, there is absolutely tremendous value in that. Before we move on, I really want to touch on some of the investing work and kind of introduce that topic to our audience as well. But I'd love to hear just present day, how has PreventScripts evolved, and how would you describe the business as it stands right now?
We are We are at a seed stage and we're about to hit a break even. And we have some very nice partnerships coming together now that are both on the research side. I can't say too much exactly about the research partnerships, but we have some significant research partnerships coming together to look at that total cost of care that I mentioned. We have a large academic medical center in New York that we're working with on some ADA grants right now. And we have another deal that's coming together with a very large patient population. And so we're really in this mode of growth, of doing everything we can to implement the technology as fast as possible and to be
Hmm.
able to scale up this implementation more quickly. Hitting a break even this year is what we're looking for, and then just excited to help more patients and help more providers and build it from there.
That's so exciting. And so it sounds like PreventScripts is both improving patient outcomes and making or saving practices money in the long run. Amazing.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's that stage that awareness of stage of change and self-efficacy early on, and providing that information to providers in a reimbursable decision support, and that takes none of their time and offloads, 15, 20 minutes of work that someone would do to collect these surveys,
Yeah.
in addition to this remote monitoring piece and stratifying the population into these bespoke remote monitoring programs and offering those remote monitoring programs at the point of care, helping patients improve their blood pressure and their blood sugar and their weight and that weight circumference, helping them get those numbers down in a year in our programs, and then helping providers find a real return on investment for that. In addition, you take that diabetic and drop their A1C 1.4 points, well, then they're less likely to go to the ER. They're obviously less likely to be admitted in DKA. They're not going to be in the ICU. And so we're taking this upstream approach to not only avoid readmissions, but to avoid admissions altogether.
I, I mean, I can't say enough that I believe in the mission of the company through and through. And for the patient, the customer, the provider, I guess, is technically the customer, but for the end user, the patient, is this an app? Is it a web-based application? How does the patient interact with the software, with the program?
We see that patients are able to onboard at the point of care in clinic, that we have QR codes. Once a patient is eligible, they
Nice.
put their phone on the QR code, they download the mobile app, they have a little coupon code that they put in that identifies them with the clinic, and then they fill out a couple of little onboarding screens and put in their address, and then we ship them their remote monitoring kit, and they get that in a couple of days, and they get this nice little kit. It's, we're here for you. It's your provider. Really, this sort of shared decision making kind of approach. And then the patient gets their kit set up, and then they're enrolled and they're tracking, and then they check in monthly. They can just talk into the mobile app, get their appointment scheduled, and set in to do a coaching visit monthly. And so that's the rhythm of the program. It's sort of 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the afternoon, once a month visit with the coach. And then weekly we have surveys that are sort of these weekly check-in surveys. I see you picked eat less sugar. How's it going with eating less sugar?
Mm,
What's hard about eating less sugar? What's easy about eating less sugar? What can you try next, so that we're helping them break the big hard eating less sugar, which is hard. I fall off the wagon
yeah.
on that all the time. Fell off the wagon on that back in
Yep.
December. But
Yeah, me too.
breaking that into these micro goals, breaking the big
Hmm.
goal into little micro goals, and then helping them develop the micro habits. And that program takes, if you have all, 7 behaviors to go through, the program is about 6 weeks for each behavior. And so it's really a year-long behavior change program to help equip patients with 50 hours of nutrition education, everything they need to be successful.
Who What provider, what practice could provide 50 hours of nutrition education in 1 year?
I
Yeah.
know.
Oh, that rocks, Natalie. That rocks. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And the cadence of weekly check-ins feels very kind of like low friction, monthly coaching, not a daily like in your face.
Right. It's really tricky finding that sweet spot where you can't just barrage people with information. They'll take the whole app off the phone and you'll never see them again.
Yeah.
You can't do that. And so it's taken a while to find this sort of sweet spot. And what we found in our focus groups that we did with a group of our patients a couple months ago is that patients, a certain goal might get to be too hard. And they might,
Mhm.
maybe cutting back on tobacco is too hard right now, but I just want to toggle and work on drinking more water, which inadvertently might help you cut back on your cigarettes. But, the
Right.
fact that patients can toggle between these my plans when one seems too cumbersome or too difficult is something that we find that patients have appreciated.
Amazing. All right, let's toggle a little bit to being an investor and that other hat that you wear. A lot of my listeners may not be familiar with this extra path that they could possibly go down in their career as a healthcare provider, as a healthcare practitioner. So, can you kind of introduce the topic of investing on a bigger scale, even angel investing, to our audience and explain a little bit to us?
Sure. Sure. In my reading, before I joined Scrub Capital as an LP, in my reading, I read Jason Calcanis' book, Angel Investor, or How to Be an Angel Investor, or maybe just Angel. And I read it because I wanted to kind of just get an idea of that investor mindset. I read it years ago. I read it the year it came out. And then I kind of, took that information, kind of forgot about it. And then sometime in the fall, not this year, but the year before, I knew Rebecca from the Doximity Medical Advisory Board meeting, this meeting that was in Napa, and it was kind of a fancy schmancy thing. We got to go to the French Laundry, and I was on the medical advisory board. I met her that weekend, and she was a medical student. And I just remember hitting it off with her and just a very positive person and I could sort of see this ambition in her at that time. And I somehow stumbled across Scrub in maybe the Slack channel. I might have just gotten an invite to the Slack channel. I'm trying to remember. And I said, who are these people? And then I knew Chrissy from Startup
Mhm,
Health and had heard her
mhm.
speak before and always thought very highly of her, the way she approaches storytelling, and learned a lot from her in Startup Health years before she wrote this book that she's just released.
Yeah, of
And
course.
then knew of Jonathan Slotkin. I knew of him and thought, well, this is interesting. Why don't I, jump into this Slack channel and start networking and talking? And it kind of just started that way for me. And then I saw Jacob Reiter's there and Michael McConnell, one of our foremost preventive cardiologists is in this Slack channel. So what in the world is going on?
Mhm.
And then when it came to a couple of months later, they really put the fund together and developed their minimums. And I just decided I need to do this for a couple of reasons. There were a few deals in Kentucky that I wanted to invest in. And I just almost wrote checks, but I didn't really know what I was doing. So I said, if I'm going to do this, then I need to read this book, read Jason Calcanis' book again, which was still sitting on my Amazon. I'm going to read that book again, which I did. And then I said, well, I'm going to, of course I had to talk to the boss, my husband, and we had a family decision, anytime you're
Yeah, of course.
spending large chunks of money, we decided to do it. And really, I wanted to do it partly to make money, partly to get a deduction on my taxes, but also to really make healthcare better in a meaningful way. So it kind of brought me back to mission, and our healthcare system is just continues to be so terrible. And, it's 5 trillion, 5.3 trillion now. We haven't really
Yeah.
done anything meaningful. And so, from a mission standpoint, I knew that I was to a point that I could help other founders, that I had at least enough experience. I know what to do. I know what not to do. I've, gotten this company to a certain point. I know that you have to do a founder-led sales approach, and all these sort of school of hard knocks and lessons that I learned in the course of building our company. I felt like I can help other companies. And I wanted to get kind of this cross section of the market and understanding of the market at this higher level. So I did the investment and really continued to meet all the doctors in the group, which was wonderful. And we have really built it into something special, and several of our companies have been marked up, and we
Yeah.
do due diligence. We have 2 pitches a week, and then we diligence the companies, and we, you know, work as a team, and then the partners make the final investment decision. And I have met a whole bunch of other doctors like me, which
Yeah, it
is
makes you feel a little less crazy, right?
which is not
Being in a
easy
room of
for
like-minded
me.
people, right?
The list of doctors that have started, grown, and, gotten to the point of acquisition for
Yeah.
companies, that's really like a short list of doctors.
Yeah.
And sort of to have that group of docs to learn from and to help me with my business, it's been incredible.
Yeah. That's one of
Hopefully all of the companies won't fail.
right. Right. We all hope so. Who was talking about this the other day? I think it was Hallie on a we had like a fireside chat the other day, and she
Mhm,
kind of presented the case of like failure is normal. Failure is normal, right? Like
mhm,
we
mhm.
expect to have some failure, so let's just get the
Yeah,
reps in anyway.
yeah. If you're not
That's really
failing
cool.
at some level, you're not trying hard enough.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And
Mhm.
I mean, in the end, failure is a part of the success, right? There are no successful people out there that have never failed. So do you see yourself continuing like down the road of being an investor? Do you have any, dreams or intentions of branching off maybe and advising more in the world of health tech? Like where do you see this going for your future?
I was invited to do a board training a couple of years ago. It was put on by a group of private equity firms, Deerfield, Oxyon, and 2 or 3 others, Advancium. And it was a board training for women to learn the ropes of coming onto a corporate board. And their initiative is to take this sort of dominant white male corporate board
Yeah.
ecosystem and to plug more women into these boards. And so I did that board training, and I took on a board position at our local symphony here as an old musician that was sort of coming back for first, full circle for me. And
That's so
I've
cool.
been working on, developing myself as a board member, and I'm on the board of my own company that I started with my partners. So, doing those board meetings and have really learned a lot about that. So, doing corporate board work is something that I want to do more of. I want to do more speaking. I've been doing some speaking engagements lately and some keynotes. And the American Medical Association actually invited me to be on their staff for a entrepreneurial summit they're having in August. So I get to come in and
Amazing.
teach young doctors how to start
Yes.
companies. So I'm super excited about that. And who knows?
Congratulations.
Yes, I think that's gonna be really fun. Like, here's all the mistakes. I have a little post. Well, it's actually a book. I've written a couple books, a book for patients that's a nutrition book. And then I thought, well, let's tell the story of starting a digital health company too. And so then distilling that down into some blog posts, it's like the 12 commandments of digital health, things to do, things not to do, don't avoid, how to avoid the mistakes that we made earlier days along the way. And I like speaking because I get to tell the story of our patients. I get to tell the story of Kentucky. I get to sort of point out this, the madness of having a $5.3 trillion healthcare system and still everyone is not very healthy,
Mhm.
and the cost. And so I'm just so passionate about it. I'll talk to anybody. I'll talk to, anyone on the street, I'll flag down to talk to about it. So the bigger the audience I can get to talk about that. And then, talking to med students about nutrition is a core thing that needs to be happening that's missing. So I love
Yeah.
talking to these young students about nutrition, and they're about to start baking more nutrition education into these medical school curricula. So that's something I'm really passionate about. And what's the other thing? So I'll be working on those things, finishing
Mm-hmm.
the nutrition book. It's currently a 100-page ebook, but I'm shopping it for sort of a larger publication for a nutrition book, and then the business book, and then doing more speaking and kind of telling the story and elevating the frequency of the company, but at the same time pointing out, not only the moral injury of physicians, but sort of using my own outrage. What is it? It's really righteous anger, using my righteous anger to hopefully motivate people
Sure.
to do more to
Yeah.
help our patients and our families be better.
Yeah. You got a lot going on. But we knew that from the second we started talking. I can't wait for your book to come out. I know that we've talked about that before. I want to get a signed copy from you whenever it does.
All right, all right. You got it. You got it.
Yeah, I would love to read it. I cannot wait. Oh my goodness. Well, please keep us updated on all of your speaking engagements. Any final words of wisdom? It's been really a pleasure. We're hitting our time. It's been such a great joy, and I feel like I've learned so much from you. You did mention at one point that you think about starting a digital health company in terms of 12 commandments. Can you
Yeah.
leave the audience with one?
I'm trying to think of the best one. Thou shalt not assume a customer's problem
Amen. Thou shalt talk to the cardiologist before assuming
before
that
assuming.
they want their patients to be healthier. No, no shade to any cardiologists out there. We know you love your patients.
I started with 10 commandments, obviously, but then I thought of two. I thought of two more, so I turned it into 12.
The more the merrier. All right, Natalie. Well, if the listeners want to reach out to you or get in touch with you or learn more about you, where can they find you?
Most everywhere, but you can send me a LinkedIn invite. You can take a look at my website, nataliedavismd.com. You can always contact me through PreventScripts.com and follow me on Substack, LinkedIn. I'm usually there ranting about various things. And my Substack, I'm kind of trying to figure out my audience, but I'm doing a lot of just practical tips on health and nutrition and sort of incorporating the lifestyle essential 8, actionable short things you can do to improve your health. So on the consumer side, but then also trying to help builders in digital health with
Mm-hmm.
tips and tricks as well.
Amazing. Well, all of those links I'll get from you, and they will be linked in the show notes. Again, Natalie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. It's been really great to get to know you a little bit more, and I'm sure that the audience feels the same way. I'm really excited to see what is in store for PreventScripts on the horizon, what is in store for you as a physician, as an entrepreneur, and as a leader, of course. I feel really honored that you shared some of your time with me. Listeners, please make sure to follow and like and subscribe. If you didn't catch the memo, we are going to be publishing every other week from now on. You can get in touch with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. Those will also be in the show notes. And of course, if you are a clinician who is a little bit, of a crazy person like Natalie and I, and you are doing some really cool things in the world of healthcare and healthcare innovation, please reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation with you and maybe get you on the show. All right, friends, we are signing off. Thank you again, Natalie.
Thank you.
All right, see ya.
Bye.